Baruch haba b'Shem Yahuwah. This is Revealing the Word. Today we are going to take a journey together and discover the hidden word of Yahuwah. So put on your broad-brimmed hats and get ready to excavate the word with us, because we Shema Elohim with you. Shalom, this is your host, Jessica Arianis of HaKo Kala Radio, and my special co-host, Eric Bissell. In this episode of Revealing the Word, we will continue our excavation on the word hazak, strength. Shalom, Eric. Glad to have you back. I know last week we were talking about the word hazak, especially in time of trouble, and what it means to be hazak bemuzi, as well as hazak hamatz, strong and full of courage. Now, I know that there seems to be reports of trouble, kind of like Jacob's woes, the birth pains of great trials. I find that in this time of awakening, it's a joy to know that we are being aroused like the Shulamite. It starts off with the Shulamite resting in her bed, which is a place of comfort and leisure, which symbolically signifies a place of putting away the cares of the world. It's when you end your procession with your daily events, and you take leisure, and you allow your body to rest and to recuperate. And so here the Shulamite is in that state of mind, and it says that she's aroused, she's awakened, she's quickened. And so that makes me think about those of us who at some point in our lives were like the Shulamite. We were not so assertive or proactive. Maybe we thought we were in the church or in our former state of religion, but we really didn't understand the powers that be. We couldn't really see our enemies. So it's like when Shaul said that without eyes to see or ears to hear, he's punching the air and he's not really sure what his enemy looks like, or exactly how to be strategic about his defense. And so we were sort of in that passive position, that passive mindset. I noticed that quite often we would end up really fighting ourselves and thinking that our battle was flesh and blood. Eric, I don't know about you, but many times I heard many believers out of their own mouths, they would say, oh, the devil is a liar, or my boss did this, or, my so-and-so did this, or this person's doing this, or this person's attitude causes me to do this, or this entity has power over this. And so I used to think, wow, our war is not against flesh and blood, even though there are principalities and rulers of darkness that can manipulate the flesh and work in corruption. However, either Yahuwah is for us or he's against us. And if he's for us, who can be against us? I mean, it was Yahuwah who allowed the adversary to trip up Job, right? So how much more? I'm thinking, this guy that we call the devil wouldn't really exist in our vocabulary if it wasn't for this Hebrew Bible, this Hebrew book. I mean, because there is adversity in other forms of literature and religions, but this devil guy, this Satan, this Lucifer, this Nakash, this serpent who was from the beginning, really is a character in the Elohim that I serve's book. It's in his contents. He created this character to do as I believe Yahuwah wills. And so are we to be intimidated? Are we to retreat? Are we to fall back? I think no. If you were with us last week, you remember that we mentioned that word malice or wickedness and what it means to be a wicked person, or at least in this context here, it's from the word kakos, which means to be a coward, and it speaks primarily of a soldier, one who is passive or one who remains passive, kind of like the Shulamite, one who recedes in battle, one who becomes weak or fails in heart. And it comes from the Hebrew verb hazo, which is very similar to the word hazak. It has the primary letters. And so we were talking about this word hazo, and I think I had mentioned in Deuteronomy 31, verse 7, where Moshe tells Joshua, to be strong and full of courage as he enters into the land to inherit it. And so, Eric, you were talking about that word hazak bamuzi. Again, hazak is that word strong, and it means to be fortified or to be steadfast. And if you couple that word with amatz, which is what Moses told Yahushua, be strong and courageous. Hazak hamatz. Hazak hamatz. Well, Joshua is going into a foreign land, a land that he had not known before. And so he's going into a place of the unknown, and he knows that there are giants in the land. And these are kind of like, these mighty ones, like the actor that I spoke about in that movie, The Rock. Uh, the San Andreas movie, and there was this mighty champion, that seemed to save the world from this great calamity. So Joshua knows that he has to confront these mighty ones, these giants, and he's told by Moses, be strong and courageous as you confront them. Don't retreat in battle. Don't have wickedness in your heart. Do not have folly. And so, but you were talking about Hazak Bamuzi. So what does that look like? You were saying that this word musi is very similar to the word moose, and the strength of a moose and what it means to grab hold of his strength in time of distress.
Well, the play on words is that the word meaning fortress, stronghold in Hebrew is pronounced muz or ma'uz or maruz, something like that. And it's similar to the English word moose because the Z sound of the Zion gets turned to an S sound, and that Isaac Moseson's book on Edenics, The Origin of Speeches, is the title of the book, and he talks at length about how these words are very similar, coming from the same Hebrew word, Edenic word at the root, at the basis of where language came from. So I'm just keep mentioning this word musi as a play on words in order to get the image stuck in our mind, so that when we see a moose and the fortress of his antler system, it'll remind us, oh, we better take hold of Yahweh's mauzi, because the same way that he said, tell you what, you guys, if you do what I say, you'll get the blessing. If you don't do what I say, you're going to get the curse, because that's the way it works. So tie for yourself these little threads, these fringes, and put them on the edges or corners of your garments, and they'll fly around. Like the word tzitzi, fly, it comes from the same word to fly in the wind like a fringe, and your eye will notice them. And when you notice the blue thread and the fringes, you go, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to do what he said. It's a reminder. So as a reminder, as a little tzitzi fly in your mind, when you see a moose, you'll go, oh, that's right, Yahweh promised to be our fortress, our stronghold, our castle, that if we take a hold of this concept by taking a hold of his commandments, and I'm saying take a hold, as we said last week, that the word spelled kuf het means take hold. The word spelled het kuf is the word command, as I've ordered you and given you these things. And to put a Zion in between the het and the kuf is like a weapon inside the commandments, or this badge of authority inside the commandments. And he says, grab a hold of this. So as we grab a hold of the commandments, they act as this weapon on the castle wall, or the weapon to siege a castle if it's us against that, or the weapon in our hands to defend the castle if it's flipped around. There's these pictures that we could play different ways.
Well, if you think about a stronghold, Eric, what comes to my mind is Jericho, and how they were told to march around this particular stronghold. Well, for those of you who don't particularly know the word stronghold, it's actually a military term, and it speaks of a city gate. And so I just want to give you an idea. of what a stronghold would represent and why it would be implemented or used. And so basically, you would have those who were part of the upper echelon or part of the government system of that time in a kingdom. And so it would generally be the king and his wife and children or wives or concubines, what have you, and then his cabinet or his ambassadors or his people, his employees. And then you would have all of the elite that would dwell in this hedged in place, this fortified place. And so within the city walls, and so it was usually a place that was protected, heavily armed and protected. And the walls would be extremely high. And what it meant to be fortified was they would put watchmen on the walls. And these watchmen were there day and night to preserve the integrity and the strength of those walls, because those walls would keep the enemy out. And so the term that would be used by the enemy was the term penetrate or to pregnate the walls. And so if a city was pregnable, that means that they were able to enter in through the gates and besiege the city. But if in fact they were unable to, then it was impenetrable. They could not penetrate the walls. And so it kind of reminds me of the uterus and how the seed has to become valiant in order to penetrate and to cause life or to cause a reaction. And so basically, they were very creative. Some would have, just various ways to protect the integrity of the wall. And so, again, a city was only as strong as its walls. Now, outside of the city gates or outside of the walls, the people, basically the nomads or like the citizens of that particular city or nation.
Well, the field workers, what we
Right.
might call in a feudal system, the peasants
The
were
peasants.
they were out in the villages. The village is technically an unincorporated hamlet, a place for people to live under the covering of a city's influence.
Right.
That's village, some underneath another bigger city's jurisdiction and protection.
Kind of like when David says, underneath your shadow, I will hide away. So right, that's the right word.
Villagers, maybe.
Villagers, but you used another term that I thought was more appropriate. You said peasants, perhaps. Yeah. So you had the citizens of that particular region, and so they dwelled in certain communities, and they would live out there. And of course, there's strength in numbers, and so what would happen is if a governing nation desired to sack that region or to provoke war against the king, they would usually rape and pillage the citizens that were unprotected by the wall. They were penetrable. So they would go into these little villages and they would burn them up and kill their children and, do some horrible stuff so that the news would then be carried to the ambassadors or to the king, and the king would then be inspired to respond somehow and sometimes react even by going to war. So this is what it means to be fortified, a fortified place. It means to have a hedge of protection or a hedge around you so that everything that dwells within that hedge is protected by that wall. And that's where we get that term watchman on the wall. Oh, Jerusalem, these watchmen, because the watchmen would walk around the height of the wall looking and keeping scout for any threat. And Yahushua actually goes out to be alone with Yahuwah at one particular time, and he's going into intercession. He tells his watchmen, he says, watch for me, keep watch. And they actually have malice in them. He even calls them wicked because they had fallen asleep and they had done exactly what this word malice intends, which is to fall back or to fall asleep. But you were talking about this word fortification or bemuzi, and I do want to say that the letters here, the two-parent root, is Ayin Zayin. I love that. Ayin Zayin. And it basically means to be bold, right? The boldness of something. But just those letters alone, what do we have? We have Ayin, which is, this letter is represented by the picture of an eye, which can mean to, well, basically to perceive or to know. And then we have the Zion, which is like a mattock, and it can be used during times of harvest to harvest the wheat. They would use this as a tool. It could also be used as a weapon. And I mentioned in last week's show about that word ma'uzi, how it made me think of the Israeli weapon Uzi, which, Eric, I don't know if you know too much about an Uzi, but this was a personal defense weapon that was actually used by rear echelon troop officers as a frontline weapon by the elite forces. So this weapon, this Uzi, and then this word bamuzi, it makes sense. So basically, if you combine the letters ayin, zayin, again, the picture of something knowing or a perception or a paradigm of a weapon. So here he's saying to have a perception or to know the weapon, to know the weapon. And here Yahuwah is telling Israel, look, I know that the nations are raging against you and that there are hostile forces around you. However, if you take hold, that is, if you know that I am your weapon. And then in the verse right before it, in verse 4, it says, who can battle against me? Because he is our weapon. He is our fortification. He is our stronghold, right? He is our mighty one, our champion. If he is for us, who can be against us?
The other interesting thing about this word ayin Zion is that it's the English letter equivalence. The ayin is the O, and the Zion is actually the letter G, but it's pronounced as the letter Z, so it would be pronounced as Oz, like the Wizard of Oz, the Land of Oz from the movie, the book. And it's actually the word that means goat, as in Azazel or Azazel goat. So the word for goat, ayin Zion, also means, as you mentioned, bold, dynamic, bright, fierce, sharp, acrid. It's something that is so beyond everything else that you look at it with astound. So the same way that you'd see a goat up in the highest parts of the mountains, you might picture a mountain goat up in the Alps, jumping off of these cliffs from one to another, landing on just the slightest little ledge. And you say, wow, how do they do that? Well, the reason they do that is because they were designed by the Creator to have the agility, but also the mind and the fearlessness to be able to take on a leap and not think about, oh, well, what if my foot stumbles, or what if I slip? What if the rock I land on isn't secure and I now go down thousands of feet? Perhaps these goats' minds are not fit or not calibrated, not designed to think those thoughts, because I've seen some pictures before, nature shows on National Geographic or whatever it might be. You can probably look on the internet and find them. But to see what some of these goats do is just mind-blowing. But with that in mind, there's another verse, which is a few verses, which is of high regard of significance and pertinence here. It's actually Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 29 to 33. And this is a little different translation. The Erictology translation reads like this: declaration toward you all, no brokenness and no fearing their eminence. Now this word eminence is spelled hey, or mem, hey, mem, but it's just translated them. But this word eminence is this picture of they're bigger, they're stronger, they're meaner, they're tougher, they're wealthier, they got bigger castles, bigger guns. These guys are just so incredibly great. And Yahweh's saying, I command you, I am giving my utterance to you, Israel, and imparting to you these words: no brokenness and no fear of their apparent grandeur. You might think that they're like these goats jumping across the mountains that are so tough and so daring and so incredible, but no, that's your job. You, Israel, your job. And it goes on to say, Yahweh your Elohim proceeds before you himself. He will battle for you. Like that whole production, that battered Mitzrayim, Egypt, as you observed with your own eyes, and in the wilderness, that conformational exhibition of your favored status, where you were picked up and carried, being the personal concern of Yahuwah, your Elohim, just the same as any man would lift up his very own son. Throughout the entire journey that you obviously have been guided, flowing along continuously until you arrived as here at this place. The fact that you're here is the testimony that this is true. And so according to this matter, there is absolutely nothing you can't accomplish in Yahweh your Elohim, with him, through him, Yahweh your Elohim. He is the scout walking before you, leading the path, entertaining you as a tour guide, exploring for you the place to camp, protected and fed, with fire at night for you to see, as an education such that you will walk accordingly. And your only relevant oppression is the affliction of clouds throughout the day. What kind of an affliction of that on a hot day? And then Yahweh hears the voice of your words. That's the beginning of verse 34.
Hallelujah. And that's your rendition. That is how you ciphered it with the letters, right?
Yes.
Well, as you think this word that's phenomenal. That just brought even delight to my heart. As I consider again, in time of great destruction, I know I had mentioned it, and I don't want to discourage anybody if you are out there and for sure, if Yahuwah is ministering to you and saying, look, rise up and remove yourself from this, heap of ash, remove yourself from where you are. And if he's relocating you, by all means, go with peace. Hazakamatz, hazakamatz. Go with courage to take the land that Yahuwah is showing you. We're not saying that you shouldn't be uprooted, and that I personally believe that the Father will gather us together, and that perhaps we will be strengthened here in communities, if not here in other regions. Perhaps he wants to preserve the people that are here in California. Perhaps he's speaking prophetically to us and saying, look, it is possible that there will be an earthquake, or there will be some great calamity that will come upon the people in this city or in this state, and he wants to remove us, which I personally believe that he will when the time is right. I don't want to stay in the cities for much longer, and we are also preparing to go, but we're waiting to hear on him clearly where he would have us to go. I only want to go where he goes and be effective there. So I am simply speaking about lacking courage and simply saying, let us flee from here because of the calamity. And that, I think, is the difference, right, Eric? That we're saying, look, whoa, there is trouble, let me flee. It's kind of like when Yehukanan or John, the immerser, the baptizer, John the Baptist, when he spoke to the men who had come to get baptized or immersed, and he said, who told you to escape wrath? Who told you to come? Calamity has come upon you, and now you come running to me. He says, go back, repent. Don't worry about, the calamity, repent. And so it's kind of like that. Like, we see that there's great judgment coming, and we don't realize that perhaps the judgment is coming because of the condition of our own heart. And so instead of running from the problem as though running or having, being cowardice in our own heart is going to preserve us from the judgment of Yahuwah, that's ludicrous. Instead, it would be wise and behoove us to say, I repent, make teshuvah, return, and make straight those crooked ways. Allow his word to come and make straight. So then he can become a fortifier to you. He will surround you as a weapon. He will become a Madoc to you, a Zion, and then you will perceive him as your weapon, your fortress, your stronghold. But in Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 1, here it says, O you children of Benjamin, gather yourselves to flee out of the midst of Jerusalem, and blow the trumpet in Tekoa, and set up a sign of fire in Beth Hakarim, for evil appears out of the north, and great destruction. Well, the beauty of this particular verse is that our fellowship's name is Bait Hakarim, and it means a house of the vineyard or the house of the garden. And he's saying here us that there will be a sign, or that we are to set up a sign of fire in the house of the vineyard, or in the Beit HaKarim. But it says, O children of Benjamin, gather yourselves to flee. Well, guess what, Eric? That verse right there, that statement, gather yourselves to flee, is your word, Bamuzi. Bamuzi.
I don't have it in front of me, so tell us, for those of us who don't have the Hebrew, what word did they translate Bamuzi into? Because when you say gather yourselves to flee, none of those sound like the word Bamuzi.
Right. So it's ooze. So it's the root, or the parent root, the two-letter root, ayin zayin, the one we were talking about. Remember, to perceive the matic, or to see the weapon, right? So Yahuwah is saying that he will give us a revelation of his strength, basically, to grab hold, to return to him, to grab hold of him, and he will become our strength. We will know him as our strength. And so that's the word here. It's ooze, and it's from Strong's 5756. Again, simply meaning to be strong, to be strengthened, and it means to be saved, to save by flight, to gather oneself. Because right after that, he says, gather yourself out of the midst of Jerusalem. But he's not saying run from calamity or destruction in Zion, retire. He's not saying that. He's actually saying gather yourselves together as a fortified people. Become fortified. As you gather yourself, you're fortified. Then you can blow the trumpet and set a sign of fire.
So this word for to gather yourself, is that the word that they're translating as Ayin Vav Zion?
No, Ayin Zion.
Or Ayin Zion, to gather yourself. Because see here in this other verse, it was translated as take hold. Well, the word chazak was take hold, actually, or to grab a hold of my stronghold. So my stronghold. So you're saying that the same translation as my stronghold in one place is technically the same essence as gather yourselves together.
Right.
Becoming the stronghold.
Right, almost. Right. So here we also have Ayin, Vav, Zayin, and it means to gather in strength, a strong refuge as a place for making a firm and fierce stand. And that's what I'm saying. I'm talking about a boldness through strength. I'm talking about Hazakamats when Moses told Joshua Hazakamats, be strong and full of courage, gather together these people, gather them together with you as you go in. These people that Yahuwah has sworn to their fathers to give them an inheritance, then let them inherit it. You see, so he's not telling them that his strength is going to be against flesh and blood, or that he's going to use this weapon against the nations. He's not talking about that. That's going to take some sort of physical effort. But he's saying here, look, be strong and full of courage to possess the land, the inheritance, the promise, because your adversary is going to come against you to try to thwart the plan of Yahuwah, which is for you to fulfill the promises, for you to become the promise, for you to manifest your husband's seed. The seed of Abraham was given to Abraham to produce the promises of Yahuwah. And here we now see that seed coming into full maturation, or into full bloom. And we see then he's telling that seed line, go forth with the fierceness. Go forth and be. Yod He Vav He. Be what he has called you to be. Become. Take hold of it. And that's what you were saying. Hazak Bamuzi, take hold of the promises. Well, I want to say here, that I think I'd mentioned last week about Hazak Amatz, and that word Amatz basically meaning not to retreat. It's the opposite of that word Hazo, which is wickedness. It means to be alert, to be physically and mentally full of courage in the mind, and physically full of courage. It means to be confirmed. It means to be steadfast in mind, to be strengthened, established. Again, that word fortified. That's what Amatz means. It means to be fortified, to increase, to prevail. It's exactly what the disciples or the learned ones did not do when Yahushua told them, be a matz, be alert, be a watchman, stay awake and keep watch as I go away for a minute. And I think even when we think about the virgins, how they fell asleep, they were not a matz, they were not alert, they did not remain. And so I want to say this. In Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 7, it says, but the house of Israel is going to refuse to listen to you, for they refuse to listen to me. For all the house of Israel are impudent and hard of heart. Well, guess what? That word, impudent, is from Strong's 2389, and it's hazak, what we're speaking of here. And but in this sense, it's not hazak bemuzi or hazak amatz. It's actually coupled with the word metzak, hazak metzak, and it means to be headstrong. It means to have an outward show. In this sense, here in this particular verse, it's speaking of the Israelites who were proud, puffed up outwardly, and who were stiff in their heart. Okay, well, guess what? This term, the same term, impudent or hazak metzak, is also used in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 49, spoken of when David struck the Philistine. He says that he struck him in his metzak. That's that word forehead. Metzak means a outward show. It means strong-headed. It means forehead. So here David came up against this adversity, this mighty one, this one that was a form of pretentiousness, and he said, you know, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Well, when you look at David, remember David was but a boy. He was maybe 18, 19, 17, 18 years old. And even Saul, they laughed at him because he seemed to be ill equipped. And even when they went to anoint him as king, when Samuel went, he looked at all the other sons, and Yahuwah said, nope, not this one, not this one, not this one. And then it wasn't until he realized there were no more sons, and he said, do you have another son? He said, yeah, but you want nothing to do with this little kid. He's singing songs to the sheep. And so the lesson there was that Yahuwah said, man judges on the outside, on the metzak, strength on the metzak, but I determine it from the heart, from the inward person. And so David became a lover of Yahuwah. He developed an intimate relationship. He did exactly this, Hazak Bamuzi. He ended up Ayin Zayin. He knew that Yahuwah was his weapon, was his strength. Matter of fact, there were many times when David could have taken out Saul, but he knew that Yahuwah was his Bamuzi, his strength. And so he said, not in my strength, but in your strength. And so he knew that he would be his defense. And this is what we're talking about here. He comes against this massive giant, this uncircumcised Philistine. He's a little scrawny little boy, and he's coming up against this big, rock character who's saying, roar. Not only is it just Goliath, but the entire Philistine army is behind him. And he takes his little stone, which guess what? By the way, that stone is the word hazak. Let's go in 1 Samuel 17:49. says, "And David put his hand in his bag, and took therefore a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in the forehead." Again, that's that word metzak, that the stone sunk into his forehead and fell upon his face to the earth. And it says in verse 50, "So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David." That word there, used in verse 50 for prevailed, is hazak, to fasten, to siege, to be strong, to be courageous, to be mighty. But why would it say here, he prevailed over the Philistine, but not with a sword? He had no kereb, no sword, no instrument, no weapon, no matic. That's that word here, matic. That's the word we talked about, bemuzi, which is from that word zari, which means a matic or a weapon. So it says here that he had no weapon in his hand. So where was his hazak? If he prevailed, if he hazak over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, well, that word stone is eben. It's just where we get the word ben, which means to build up or to build a stone, which is what I spoke about earlier, Yeshua being the eben stone or the chief cornerstone. So we see here that it was because the word was residing within him and that word was revealed. It became his strength. He perceived that Yahuwah was his fortress. David has an internal strength. He has something that he's relying on. Well, that word David, or his name David, comes from the word David, but it comes from the root word dodi or dod, which means to love. Yahuwah describes David as one who is after his heart. Actually, it means one who loves the things of Yahuwah. That the matters of Yahuwah's heart are important, become something that David has an affection for. He is kind of like Eric. Eric is always saying, we got to care about Yahuwah's stuff. And that's kind of like what David did. He cared about his stuff. So that word David means love or loving, and it comes from the root word dod or dodi. What's the term? My dodi, my beloved.
It's ani ladodi ve dodi li.
Ani.
Ani ladodi, I am unto my beloved. Ani is I. La, it's just the letter lamed or L. Ani la dodi. Ve means and, it's the letter vav. Dodi li. Dodi is my beloved's. Li would be unto me or is mine. I am my beloved is mine. Ani la dodi. Ve dodi li.
And that's exactly what David was. So when they have a description of David being a lover of his stuff, of the things that matter to Yahuwah, this is his internal strength. This is what he's relying on. He's relying on his beloved. He's relying on the fact that he knows or he's developed an internal dialogue, a relationship with Yahuwah. And because of that, he realizes that he is now housing the stuff or the furniture or the life of the house is in him. And so if it's important, imagine if Yahuwah's property and boundary lines are important to him and he's willing to contend against forces for his boundary lines, how much more for you, Eric, or for you out there to the listeners, or for me, or for my little ones who house the furnishings of the temple or the tabernacle, or that house the Ark of the Covenant, or house his stuff. His stuff is in me. I'm like the Ark of the Covenant. I'm carrying the stuff that matters to Yahuwah. So how much more is he going to fortify us because he loves us?
Well, you mentioned about his stuff in you. The word for my beloved is a tender word of affection, is that word dodi, but the word for love is actually ahava. So let me explain love for just a little bit while we're at the tail end of the show here. Ahava is a 4-letter word. It's spelled Aleph, Hey, Bet, Hey. So Hebrew is actually the engineered language. So you have to look closer, looking at Aleph, Hey, at Hey, Bet, and Bet, Hey, the pieces that make up the word. Aleph, Hey means I am or I will as a prefix. Personal, intentional, volitional, proactive, determined. It's what you're doing, what you're all about. Hey bet is the word for give. Bet hey means in her, with her, through her, just like you were expressing. So one way to put this all together, assimilate it, ahava could be read as love is meaning I will give through her. I will give in her. I will give with her. It's not necessarily I will give to her, yet it's the expression of the author, the I am, the Aleph, choosing to project himself through the vehicle of her, being the bet letter representing her, because the word ends in a hey, which is the female feminine suffix. So just to compare a word, very interesting, love being Aleph, Hey, Bet, Hey. If you look at the word Aleph, Hey, Yod, Hey, pronounced Ehyeh, it's the word of the Almighty's name saying I am. It says that the self of the first person, Aleph, is expressing Hey through the substance of what he put his hand to make, which is the Yod. So as an artisan speaks through his craftsmanship, or a musician speaks through the notes she plays, so too we see this other picture that the heavens declare the glory of Elohim. The earth and its inhabitants portray his majesty. That's embedded in Aleph, Hey, Yod, Hey. That's another way to read the word, otherwise simply translated I am, or I will be. So then we have Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. Yahuwah, Zavot, as he calls himself, has portrayed himself as he gives himself into his people. His people then are the conduit through the agency of Israel. It's the same functional job as the Mashiach. It's actually like a transmission linkage, a progressive order sharing responsibility from one, that would be Yahuwah, to the next, which would be his Israel, the Aleph to the Bet. So the picture here is that the husband's glory is expressed through the wife, the Aleph haying through the Bet, who then hays. So the husband gives himself into her, which is what you were saying. She expresses his intention. That's the Bet hay. As she herself is the embodiment of his purpose, his heart. She is the container of him, his Bet, the Aleph's Bet. She is his work of art, his dwelling place.
Hallelujah.
Sort of a relay. So it's the husband's position to receive from Elohim, who gives freely, and then he, the husband, exalts Yahuwah in giving to his wife, who displays her beauty in giving others what has been given to her. So now this goes back into the dynamics of a marriage. If something isn't flowing, it's the man's responsibility to go back to the source, to Yahuwah, the fount of living water. In Hebrew, that's Mayim Chayim, and to make sure that he's receiving properly everything that's available to them. If wrong, the man's got to fix it. You could put this right back on Israel and say it's Israel's job to receive from Yahuwah, and if there's something wrong in the world, it's Israel's responsibility to go back to Ehyeh and say, what's wrong? You got to give us something. Give it to us so that we can dispense it back into the world and fix this problem.
You said a couple of things that triggered me. First of all, ayin mayin is also the term that was used when Isaac's servant went to find a bride.
So you're saying a different word. I said Mayim Chayim,
I'm
which
sorry,
is living water, but you're saying Mayim Ayin, isn't it? Which is to say
ayin mayim.
well of water.
Yes, the
Right?
well of ayin
Yes.
mayim. The
So I'm just trying to
fountain.
clarify for the listeners because sometimes the phonetics are hard to catch.
Sorry,
And you're not
yes.
looking at the letters.
Right, absolutely. Ayin Mayim, but I'm thinking about that well. That well, even the Mayim, where the well was the meeting place of Isaac's son, right? when
Yes,
he sent his
that's where Jacob met up with Rachel.
Rachel. There you go.
That's also at the well that Abraham's servant met up with Rebekah to bring her back to Isaac. So both of them, both Isaac and Jacob, ran into their wives at the well.
Right.
Right.
Let's see. I think it was in Genesis chapter 24, 12 through 15. It says that the servant asks Yahuwah to give him good speed, which means to shine the way or to shine upon the face, to bring about, that is to reveal or to show or to light the way, to make it happen. And when he comes about, when the actual event takes its course, and it comes to pass as he had prayed, it's the word Haya, which is Hey Vav Hey. And that's minus the Yud, which is the name of Yahuwah. But here it's Haya, and it's used to mean exist, or it comes to pass, or it Haya, it exists. And so I started thinking about the Ayin Mayim, or the opening of the waters of life, or that place of the womb, and how you said a man should then sow his seed. There he takes the things of Yahuwah that matter to his heart. He receives them, and then he in turn properly translates that to his wife, or sows into her, or invests into her, and she in turn invests in her husband's seed by bringing it to maturity, bringing it to pass. And so it made me think of the man and the woman in the garden, where Yahuwah says, because you've now listened to the voice of your wife, because you've taken her seed, everything is cursed. Because you've obeyed her, because she sowed her commands in you, she commanded you, and you did eat. And above my own commandments, above my word, you put her before me. You took her source, and you received her seed and produced after it.
That's a really good illustration. It's the inversion of what it's supposed to be. The correlation where I was trying to go, just to conclude with this thing about the meaning of the word ahava, is that being that it's the wife's role to make the husband want to come home, it's Israel's burden to invite and actually even allure Yahuwah to return to dwell with us here on earth, enthroned in us, because we, Israel, is all he's got. We are his kadoshi. And we also remember how he left us to ourselves for the sake of betraying him. If we treat his word and his being with treachery, we forsake ourselves, and he's gone. So the woman's fidelity and gracefulness attract her man's attention to be with her. So all this is what the word ahava means. Ahava could be read as I will be with her. Aleph He Bet He. Aleph He Yod He, translated I am, can be read as the ever-flowing and outpouring gives to his man, who is the work of his hand, as a picture of a constant waterfall just flowing and flowing and flowing. That's the resources we have available to us. And Yod He Vav He, Yahuwah, can be read as the man gives to his wife, who is his own song. He causes her to exist. She, who has filled herself with her husband's generosity, as it were, sings. She takes what her husband gives her and translates his heart for others to hear. Her voice becomes the tangible gift, her hands giving, expressing freely as overflow to her family, and her family to the world around them. That's Israel's job as this link, this relay in position. It's not that we can blame the world for being stupid. Look what the leaders of the various countries have done for years. It's Israel's job.
Right.
See from Yahuwah and give to the world, and Israel has failed its commission, but here we are. It's now our turn, our generation. We stand in position to put this back on track.
That's what I opened up with by saying that, it's basically like Yehukanan saying, who told you to escape the coming judgment? Who told you? Like, repent. In other words, the judgment is coming because of the heart of his people, because his bride refuses to wake up and remove her idols from her house, right? Kind of like, what's her name that
It was Rachel and Leah. Remember, she sat on
Yes.
them as they were trying to leave. And
Right. So she hid the idols in her house and tried to keep them. It's the same fury that Yahuwah is speaking, like this jealous fury that he's saying, look, I've awakened you. I've fed you in the wilderness. I preserved you. I've given you my word, both in letter and in spirit. It has given you life. I have revived you. I have kept you for many days and many years, and you've known me, yet you still fall under the oppression of your enemy. Why? Because you have their idols in your house. Why should we be afraid? Why should we be afraid when he is our stronghold? And I think it's a beautiful illustration of that word ahava, to end with that word ahava and what it means. For the joy of Elohim is our strength. And as we take delight in his stuff, like I love that Eric says that, as we take delight in him and his stuff and what's important to him and his communication and his speech and his seed and his word, then he begins to propagate. He will protect. He will fortify, just like a womb fortifies the seed, the incubation. It becomes an incubator. Well, did you know that a womb can take massive pressure? Like if the womb has become impregnated, if the walls have been besieged and there's life within the womb at an early stage, you can hit the belly pretty hard and it's going to protect what's in there because of the water sac. The fetus will actually just kind of move around. But after a while, once the child is completely developed, you can actually, there's risk of hurting the bone or something because of the thin layer. But in the early stages, the womb becomes a hedged in place. It becomes a fortified city, and it
a
protects.
Musi?
A musi, yes, and it protects or preserves the life within. How much more is Yahuwah going to protect us? So, Eric, I want to leave or end this show by saying, and you can close with me, by saying that we are housing his seed, his stuff is in us. Either it is or it isn't. Now, that should be our concern. This should be our terror. Do we have his stuff? And amongst our furniture, do we have idols? And if we do, then this should be our terror. This should be our anxiety. Not what the world is preparing to do, but what Yahuwah is going to do to his bride when he returns and finds that she has another lover in her bed by the name of Santa Claus.
That song Santa Baby comes to mind.
Yeah, so again, are we Hazakamats? Are we want to be Hazakamats, right, Eric? We want to be Hazak Bamuzi. We don't
It's our
want
only option. It's either it's Chazak Ve'emetz or Mat, which is die, dead.
or Hazak Metzak, which means to be a false mighty one, a false god, which
Right.
is having strength only on the outward, to be strong outwardly only, but to be vain or empty within. Pretty amazing. Well, thank you again for everything you bring to the table. I would love to hear more about this word ahava. So, for those of you that are listening and following along, stay with us. Come back next week. We're going to actually have Nitsa Moshe on the show with us, and we will discuss the word ahava a little bit more in regards to intimacy, as well as the shemen oil and the frankincense that's required, or actually what frankincense represents, which is, I think, purity. Thank you for sojourning with us. We say to you, Zakar, remember the words of Yahushua, and he said unto them, take nothing for your journey, neither staves nor scrip, neither bread nor money, because Yahuwah Elohim Amchom.
Yivarechecha Yahweh.
Shalom.
Shalom.
richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
All right, what's this? Oh, I see. Thank you, Bob. This is from Bob. Love the pink shirt and bathrobe combo. That's not a bathrobe. My son-in-law gave me this cardigan. Thanks, Bob. It's a cardigan. You can always rely on Bob. Hi, Bob. Yeah, right. Thanks. Just leave it to Bob, I tell you.
All right, next show we'll do Everybody's Got to Wear a Cardigan.
Yeah, there we go. That's right. That's right. Man, okay, Bob, I'm not offended, all right? Don't
take the bait.
Yeah, it's all right. No, Bob's the best. I love it. I love it.
You're listening to
Messianic Lamb Radio.
Revelation 12:10. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his anointed. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death.
Don't go away. Your show will start after a brief pause.